And go.
Good morning and happy Friday. I'm Reverend Melody Seaton, Senior Pastor of Grace United Church of Christ, located at 2500 223rd Street in Sauk Village, Illinois. Welcome, welcome, and welcome. Thank you so much for allowing us to come into your homes or your places of employment this morning. I also want to thank you once again for your support when we discussed the eyes and the coronavirus with Dr. Millicent Knight. You are still continuing to send your observations and your questions, and we thank you so very much for your attendance. This morning, we're blessed to have another beautiful woman of God and professional in our midst. And before I introduce her, I just want to do a few housekeeping things. This is a webinar, and if you are a participant in it, you will be muted until the conclusion of our discussion. And then at that point, you can feel free to ask your questions. You may also write your questions in the chat box in which I will look and then I relay them to Dr. Dorcas. So recently I read a post that pretty much sums up our discussion this morning. And it read, "Children have witnessed COVID-19, no school, quarantine, murders, riots, and we're only 6 months into the year. Our kids need a mental health check. Be kind to them. They get stressed out too." So I'd like to welcome you to Suffer the Little Children. And if you are a student of the Bible, that statement might sound familiar to you, especially if you grew up on the King James Version of the Bible or you use it now. The word suffer in this context means allow. And in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, Jesus cautions the disciples to not keep the children from coming to him. In Mark 10, it reads, "People were bringing little children to him in order that he might touch them, and the disciples spoke sternly to them. But when Jesus saw this, he was indignant and said to them, 'Suffer, allow the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for such as these is the kingdom of God.'" Suffice it to say, Jesus loved children, and our guest this morning has also spent a lot of time, many years with children. So I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Dorcas Matoe, and I pray that I said that correctly. Dr. Dorcas is originally from Zimbabwe, which is in Mother Africa. So it is especially a blessing to have her here. However, she's been in the States for over 20 years. She received a doctorate in family therapy at Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where her research focused on understanding and eliminating racial and ethnic health disparities. Dr. Dorcas has served as an HIV prevention counselor and worked with children and families in the areas of domestic violence, custody, reunification, child abuse, and neglect, as well as provided counseling to children in school from ages 2 through high school. In addition, she's a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of Florida and approved supervisor for the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. She has taught master's level students through Northwestern's online counseling program and is currently a clinical postdoctoral fellow at the Family Institute at Northwestern University. I recently had the pleasure of receiving Dr. Matoe's guidance at a retreat for clergy wellness in March. just a couple of days before the earth stood still. Just a couple of days while we were there, we actually found out that the state, as well as many other states in the country, were going to start shutting down. So, needless to say, we certainly were in the right place, and she truly blessed our nerves as we, the clergy, began to figure out how we were going to manage this surprise. It certainly came out of nowhere. But to my surprise, she lived up to her first name. I know her parents must have looked in the Bible when they blessed her with the name Dorcas. And Dorcas certainly is one of my heroines in the Bible because of her hospitality and her love and care for widows. And in that spirit, Dr. Dorcas reached out to me and asked how she could help the church. I shared some things with her in reference to children and the coronavirus. However, our most recent conversation was about systemic racism and how it continues to rear its ugly head. So, my initial concern was my realization that in our haste to make the necessary adjustments physically, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally that we needed to make for COVID-19, that we might not have either noticed or known what to do with our children who were having issues of their own. And as Dr. Matoe and I were planning for this discussion around helping our children handle COVID-19, the world witnessed the murders of our brothers, George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and Sister Breonna Taylor, due to the racist practices of this country that have gone on since 1619 toward African Americans on this soil, but in theory began on the west coast of Africa long before we were brought here. So for the next few moments, it is my desire to pull from this gifted counselor ways to empower parents, family members, caretakers, educators, the church, and anyone that spends time with children. Amen. All right, Dr. Dorcas, you stated in your bio that there is a direct connection between childhood experiences and adulthood. Would you mind unpacking that for us?
Absolutely, and thank you for having me, Reverend. I'm very honored to be here. As you expressed in your introduction, this is a very, very difficult time for all of us, children especially, because they are the recipients of what we bring to them, what they're watching, what they're exposed to. And so that is part of the reason why in my trying to understand families, I always realized, even when I worked with adults, that there were issues from their childhood that had never been resolved and that continued to impact them. And so that was the reason why I decided to pursue family therapy, just so I could get a better understanding of how deep the connection is. And so, during this chaotic time that we're in, children are watching, they're learning, they're hearing, they're seeing, and so these are things that they will either keep to themselves, or if they feel comfortable sharing, they do share. But oftentimes we do notice when they come to therapy that it shows up in different ways. And so it is critical as parents, as caregivers, as providers, as pastors, as teachers, for us to pay attention to some of the nonverbal signs that children are displaying, and to really be attentive to those. They keep these in, and fast forward 30 plus years later, 60 plus years later, they have triggering memories, events, experiences that they never go off, and that are affecting them today.
Mhm. Thank you. And that is, I definitely experienced that as an educator, that oftentimes children would be referred because of their negative behavior, but that behavior, if you traced it back, usually went back to the home or something in the neighborhood or the community
Right.
that might not have been exposed. So thank you so very much for sharing that. So, as I mentioned, our conversation initially began around COVID 19, and
Mhm.
then, of course, racism came up.
Right.
Is it possible to have an either or conversation or, a conversation about them as one, considering that similar emotions stem from them? Or are the coping mechanisms for children different for each?
So for me, it's not an either or conversation. I think it's more of an and, because you cannot talk about COVID or health without talking about racism and stigma. They're both very much connected. And as we have already seen, with COVID-19, it started as an illness in China. We've heard it referred to as the Chinese virus. And this is how discrimination begins, when we start to stigmatize people and make others feel as though they're separate from us, they're different from us. So it's definitely an and conversation, because this is why racism continues. And this is why, especially for minorities in the US, it is impossible to address the health issues without discussing racism. So they definitely go hand in hand.
Mhm. So, how do we, and maybe we'll get to this a little later, we can unpack this some more as we continue to talk, um, coping with this? I mean, how, for adults, it's difficult or
Right.
has been difficult, continues to be difficult. COVID 19 was not something that we anticipated, certainly as we began 2020. Nobody told us. There wasn't even a hint that something like this could have happened, even though we understand that our government was very much aware that it was on the horizon, probably much before that. How do we cope with that? How do we cope with these things?
Right. So I think this is what makes it challenging, not just for children, but for adults especially. As we can tell by the research that's coming out, it's still a very unknown virus. And so there are no clear definitions of what's happening, how do we cope, where do we go. The information changes depending on who does the research. And so the mystery of the disease makes it more complicated to cope with. As we have seen with COVID, the symptoms vary for individuals. So some might have symptoms, some might be asymptomatic, which makes it challenging to really know how to cope. Now one of the key differences is, with COVID, you can try and do what you can to protect yourself. So wash your hands, wear a mask, distance from others, all of those things we've been told repeatedly. And this might help you avoid getting the virus. When it comes to something like racism, again, I think parents can do what they can. They can talk to their children about, this is what racism might look like. But because it can display itself in so many ways, in so many unexpected ways, as we're watching George Floyd's murder on TV, who would have thought in 2020 that we'd be witnessing racism at that level? So with racism, I think it's such a deeply entrenched um, phenomenon that it makes it harder for children, for parents to understand how to proceed with it. You know, with both, I highly encourage having conversations with children about what's happening, talking to them in an age appropriate way so they understand, you know, checking in with them, checking on them to find out what they're hearing, trying to maintain some sort of a routine for them at home so that, you know, they're not trying to navigate and figure things out on their own, you know, using games that are engaging for children, to help them, you know, with understanding what COVID is and how to cope. So there definitely are differences, you know, but I definitely say it has to be talked about, because when it's not, then avoidance doesn't help resolve the issues either, or make children feel any safer.
I also read that especially when children are older and old enough to kind of really absorb what's going on, but not process it too well. If we don't talk to them, then they're left to what they see on television or what others tell them, or even what their peers say, which
Right.
might not be what we as a parent would want our children to understand. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, COVID, there are some things that we are told that we could possibly do that will protect us. But this whole thing with racism is that it has been going on forever. And the microaggressions, those things that we're not really paying attention to, but they happen. The looking at television and you only see, somebody brought up this morning on the news that if children only see a Caucasian person at the head of a table and they're in charge, they will internalize that that is the only person that can be in charge. And that is a form of racism. It doesn't seem like it is, but it certainly is. And so, of course, it's a lot different. I'm older than you, and it's a lot different than when I was a child, because when I was a child, it was so rare for Black people to be on television. When they were, I would run through the house saying, Black people are on television, Black people are on TV, because it just did not happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so children exhibit a range of adjustment difficulties or adjustment. They adjust differently after a disaster. Some children are resilient and they can bounce back pretty good. We still have to, as you said, pay attention to them. But sometimes they have significant distress and the signs might not be so obvious. But the other reason why I broached this subject with you, and it was so timely when you reached out to me, is because of two incidents that happened with me. One was with my grandson, who is a very gregarious young man, busy, and very happy. But I noticed that he was looking kind of sad. And this was certainly after school shut down. He has his sibling is a baby, so he really can't play with him. So his recreation was cut out and all of that. And I was saying to my daughter and my son-in-law that I felt like he was grieving, and it hurt me to my heart because there was nothing that I could do about it. And then my sister, Dr. Knight, shared a letter that my nephew wrote, and he's 11. My grandson is 4. My nephew is 11, and he had to do a composition or essay with his e-learning class. And it starts with, I hate COVID-19 because it is affecting my life. And then he goes through all of the reasons and all of the things that are being affected because of COVID-19. And then he ends it with, I hate you, COVID-19. Woo.
Mm.
Yeah. So what are the that's kind of obvious, so of course for me, I noticed it.
Right.
My sister and her husband noticed it when my nephew wrote that. But sometimes kids they're not so obvious. So
Right.
what are some of the not so obvious symptoms that we as caretakers should look for?
So I'm glad you mentioned the word um, sadness and loss. I think you did say loss,
I
but
said
it's
grieving. Yeah.
grieving
Yeah.
because it's exactly what has happened for a lot of children. They have lost the connections that they had at school. They do feel isolated even though they're in the home. I have noticed children of all ages who are starting to withdraw even at home. And it's more difficult where there's more than one child in the home. If there's 3 or 4 other siblings and parents are trying to be attentive to all of them, those who don't speak up as much might just shy away quietly. They might be spending more time in their rooms. They might start engaging in risky behaviors depending on age. Some of them might resort to cutting themselves, which is one way children, some children have identified as a way for them to cope. So, and because, these are things that are hidden, they're not obvious. When a child cries, we can hear, we know there's a problem. When a child is having tantrums, we can see, we know there's a problem. But there are other children who might not verbalize it. They might write a story like your nephew. They might draw a picture, to express what they feel and are thinking. So it is necessary to check in with the children and find where are your thoughts, what are you feeling? Tell me, what you're experiencing. If they've started maybe bedwetting and it's something that they hadn't done before, or it's now coming back. If they're having nightmares, if their sleeping or eating habits have changed, so these are things for parents to pick up on because they might not be as obvious. Young children can start thumbs, so these are all things that I think parents should be attentive. What's different? Is this the usual way my child has coped in the past? Or is there something unusual about what I see? Are they more aggressive? You know, really wanting to keep away, I think is a concerning issue.
Hmm. Thank you. Thank you. So basically, in the midst of all of this, and kudos to our parents, grandparents, and other caretakers that have had to totally readjust their lives because of COVID-19 and schools shutting down. And now there's e-learning. And some parents were fortunate enough to be able to work from home. But even working from home, one parent said it was still challenging. She had 3 children, and she's got to make sure that all 3 of them, who are different ages, are on the computer and at the time they're supposed to, and doing the assignments that they're supposed to do. It has been a tremendous stressor for parents, and so we're just praising God for you all and how you hung in there. And we just got a little bit more time to go, and we just continue to keep you all in our prayers. But in the midst of all of that, trying to handle everything, we still have to really notice and pay attention to what our children are going through. You mentioned earlier that having the conversation with them was important. And I certainly agree. However, we do know that there probably should be some limits to what we should and should not say, I guess. You would certainly be able to answer that a little better than myself. So, are there and I know this probably also varies by age, but are there things we should or should not say? You know, how do we broach that subject? Is this a cold conversation? What do we do?
Right, so that's an excellent question, and it definitely has to be age appropriate. One thing, we do know is that when children young under 5, if they don't have the ability to reason, then if they're learning on their own or taking in, you know, information that they're watching, hearing, they're still not able to make sense out of it. So, as caregivers, as parents, as teachers, it is our responsibility to make sure that what the children are hearing and learning is age appropriate. Is this something that makes sense to them? And so it is critical to use, games, pictures, stories that children can understand and relate to. One of the things that I've also noticed is that sometimes parents might not realize how their adult conversations are heard by children. And so you'll have a children coming in and saying, I heard mommy say this or tell so and so this. And that is something they hold on to because, they heard it. And so definitely children have to be shielded away from some conversations. I think it re-traumatizes them you know, um, like the video of George Floyd or anything like that that can have a lasting memory. So it is critical to make sure that we're monitoring what they're watching, what they're hearing, who they're hearing it from, and doing our best to shield them and provide them with more accurate and clear information that they can understand based on their age and level of comprehension.
All right. I in my research to prepare for this conversation with you, I ran across a term called psychological first aid. What is that, and is that something that parents can do or provide?
Yes, so it is definitely something that parents can do as well. And it's basically making sure that while we provide, you know, first aid when we notice physical wounds or, anything that we can see and touch, the psychological aspect needs just as much attention. So we're always attentive to the mental health of children. What are we doing to make sure that their mental health is also being prioritized? And so that is an easy one to miss because it's not visible, and so it's easy to, say, okay, well, the children seem fine, they're acting okay, they're playing with others, but if we're not aware of what kind of thoughts they're having, or what are some of the fears and concerns they have, then we're doing them a disservice because we're not being attentive to their mental health as well. And to that, I will also add that what's happening in the home is just as uh, destructive as what's happening on the outside. So as we know, with COVID, there's been a significant increase in domestic violence. And so children who are exposed to this obviously also have a lot more complicated mental health issues. So we always have to be checking in with kids, having one-on-one time with each child to just find out how they're doing, what they need, what are their fears, what's keeping them up at night. So being as attentive to their mental health as we are to their physical health. They can eat, they play, they do all those things, but are we attentive to what they're thinking and feeling as well?
Yeah, I experienced some parents who not only felt inadequate when it was time to help their children with their assignments, that they also did not always feel comfortable or feel like they could respond to questions and concerns that their children have. And I don't know where that was in the book on parenting, but certainly as parents, and I'm speaking as a parent myself, we don't have all the answers, and we should not put that kind of pressure on ourselves. And so we, again, thank God for people like yourself. And now being in this technological age, we're able to kind of look up some things. But as parents, we need to not feel afraid to ask questions. To check, do that check, that psychological first aid, like you said, just as we would attend to any physical problems that our children are having. Something as simple as, how are you feeling? But I would also say to parents, when they would ask a child something like, how did your day go? And they would say, fine. Then I would let them know that's not a sufficient answer. And so now you've got to come up with some more questions to get them to verbalize what was fine about it. Because eventually you might hear something that they might have been reluctant to tell you initially if you continue that conversation. So I hear what I hear you saying throughout every question that I put to you is that communicating and observing is extremely important. And I would just like to add, not jumping to conclusions about the behavior, but really trying to determine, and if it's something out of your realm, seeking out a professional that might be able to assist. So specifically about COVID-19, it's been over 3 months, I think. Some days I don't know what day it is. And as you mentioned, our knowledge about the virus, though it is a bit more than we had initially, it's still evolving. I mean, literally every day they are finding out something new about it, and looking at other places to see how it's what's going on there and what are they doing that might be helpful. If our children are still afraid as the state begins to open up, if they're still concerned, or if we have concerns, how do we really help our children re-engage, even though they're going back into a world that was not the world they left 3 months ago? How do we help them deal with that? Because some of the concerns are going to be us as parents, but how do we help them?
So I think with COVID, it is helpful when children can see how adults are modeling the appropriate behavior. And so, you might, let's say, go for a walk with them and, demonstrate social distancing, so you're still able to be out and around others, but you're still practicing the safety requirements that we've been told by the CDC to follow. So I think definitely when children can watch the parents lead by example, you have your mask on when you're out. You are still talking to people, but you're maintaining a healthy distance, and again, also telling children that, we might be okay with going out. Some other people might not be, so they may, pull away, they may cross the street, they may do all those things that, as children and people, we might feel it has to be me, So reminding children that everyone is still processing this differently. And so if we're out, if you want to, play with your friend or see your friends and their parents are not yet ready to allow their children to be out, then that's an expectation to have as well. But I think modeling the behavior that we want our children to follow and showing them that it's okay for us to be, it's okay for us to go for a bike ride, it's okay for us to be in a public place, as long as we're still doing all the necessary precautions that we're required to do, I think is probably the best thing that we can do to try and help them with the adjustment until things, start to improve.
Yeah. So we've added another thing, modeling for them, having these conversations with them, ongoing conversations, observing their behavior and being alert to any differences that are happening, but also modeling for them that, yeah, it's okay for us to go out and take in some fresh air. I know that when I'm around my grandson, I get a little concerned when I see other children because, as you say, he wants to play, and so I just take a deep breath and and hope that he won't notice them, so that we can get by, at least for right now, because typically they're usually children I don't know. So I would be very concerned about him, playing with them when I don't know anything about them.
Right.
Yeah. So
And I can also add to that, when you're having these conversations, if you do a lot of what if scenarios and you have them respond to you, so if we're out and you see so and so, how will you react? Or, what will happen in this particular situation, so that they're already prepared in advance and they're not caught off guard. Because children are children, they do want to play and hug and touch and do all those things. But I think the more they practice and they understand, what would you do in this situation? And then once they're out and about, it's not so difficult for them to know how to respond because you've already talked to them about that.
I love that. I love that. What if? That's fantastic. Thank you for interjecting that. Another way to get the child thinking, and also if they can't come up with something, that's a place for you all to have a discussion. So thank you so much with that. During George Floyd's, one of the memorial services that were held, Reverend Al Sharpton said that no matter the race of a person, socioeconomic status, education, where they live, etc., most parents want the best for their children. Doesn't matter where you live, circumstances happen. We all pretty much want the best for our children. We might not all be able to provide the best, but we want it. So I'm going to ask some other questions around this whole thing about racism, because I really believe in my heart that some changes are going to be happening. And gosh, I'm so excited to be living at this time, even though this has been such an emotional roller coaster. But we have just witnessed and still continue to witness the largest civil rights protest in history. Wow. And while some of us are still dealing with emotions, and as you talked about, childhood experiences, especially if you're in my age group, I was born in 1957. And so there are a lot of things that I experienced racially that if I'm not cognizant of it, it will come back up. And it might not always come up. My response might not, But anyway, so, and then some of us are feeling like we can't breathe. I know for a few days after George Floyd's murder, I was having a difficult time catching my own breath. So this impacted people in ways that we just could not imagine. So we've kind of talked about, the importance of having the conversations with our children. In the course of a conversation, you might realize that they have been in a situation that could be racially, and they might need to understand what happened. But how do we help our children combat racism? And I did not say cope with it, because we've been coping with it for too long. And I'm not trying to sound combative, but how do we help our children be a part of history and eradicate? Because it's going to take a long time, but still, how do we do that?
Yes. So this is one of those complicated responses. But one thing I think that I can say is, as adults, we, just like you've mentioned, things coming up for you based on your experiences in the past, understanding what our fears are as parents, what we've experienced, how we demonstrate our biases in the home, so that children are watching or they're hearing these things. And so when we have the conversations with them, what we're saying and what we're modeling go hand in hand. But we always need to understand our own pain, I think, before we can really try to educate children on how they can cope. And so this is one of the issues that comes up frequently in my work with, people of color. They have so much pain that they've held on to. And when they're in their work environments, there's a part of them that they feel they cannot show because it will not be well received, and so knowing that this is how we've tried to cope with what we've been dealt with, how then can we really talk to children in a way that they can understand that this is something that will be lifelong. It's just so deeply rooted in the political systems, the social institutions, that it's not going to go away anytime soon. And so I think to make children aware that it will pop up again in a different way, and so how can you be prepared as much as possible to deal with what happens, and sadly, a lot of it does require, working as a family, working within your community, finding support systems to help you. These are not things that also parents or teachers need to work on by themselves. Look for resources that are useful. Um, the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, they have a section on talking about race, which is very helpful. So using as much resources that are out there that are also age appropriate to help children understand that this is not a one-time thing. It is going to happen again. And so how can you best respond to whatever comes up, for you? But it's not going away anytime soon. If you go to a doctor's office as a minority, it's a concern. Am I going to get the same quality of care as someone who's not a person of color? So these are thoughts that we always have. And part of understanding and how to deal with it is we have to educate ourselves on where it can pop up or how it can pop up, so that children are not surprised that, I went to the library or wherever I went and, I was told to wait in line and other kids were not, so these little signs that we encounter on a daily basis, having these conversations with them, understanding what they're experiencing at school, so that as parents, we know how to advocate for our children at school as well.
Wow. So I want to kind of summarize some of what I heard, and also add one thing that I've realized certainly of late. So understanding our own pain before we can help our children. Wow, that's something. And I'm not sure that we all stop and do that soul searching, because if we aren't careful, we will project how we felt,
Right.
or what we did not do, or how we did not respond or whatever, to our children, and maybe that's not the appropriate way that we want them to respond. But I think that, and then you brought up the scenario about how, because many of us have had to sit on certain things because we need to feed our families and those kind of things. And so we've subjected ourselves maybe to some things that we should not have, or, you know. However, I am of the mind that it is time to empower not only ourselves, but our children, if they are able to understand certain things. And really, I think our children are empowering us, because it is the youth that have hit the streets in large numbers, and they are teaching us about freedom. Now, I also, when you were talking, I thought about this because I've been on countless Zoom conferences and so forth. And, you know, there's some people who are not aware of certain things that they do, and they're not bad people. I don't want to sound like somebody else, but they really aren't. They're good people, and they believe that they truly treat people fairly, and that they are colorblind and all of those kind of things, which you can't be colorblind. That's impossible. When I look at somebody else that's not the same color as me, I see them, because to say you're colorblind means you do not acknowledge or honor me. So I don't want you to be colorblind around me. I want you to acknowledge and honor me just like I acknowledge and honor you and who you are.
Yes.
But I also believe that because of our upbringing and the older we are, there are some things we're just not aware of that we're doing. Some microaggressions that we've been taught, that we've seen, that have been accepted, and we just don't know. And I really think that it is incumbent upon us. We also have a part in this, to be able to have the courage to say to someone, what you just said doesn't make me feel good.
Right.
I don't like how I felt. I don't like the tone that you used when you gave me that directive. I know that you might be my boss or whatever, and I just, and you could tell me to do what I need to do for my job, but the tone. And I think that we need to empower ourselves, because as you said, I got to understand myself. How do I respond to racial situations? But thank you. Thank you. Also, we've got to advocate for our children, because a lot of times our children don't know how to handle situations. So it's important for us as parents.
Yeah. And one of the ones I came across in counseling students at school is I would go into the schools, sit in the classroom, and sometimes you would hear a teacher call a child by a different name that's not used at home. And so you ask the child, well, why does the teacher call you that? Oh, because they can't say my name, you know? And it's like, these are, you know, these are the issues that we hold on to and we remember, because you're already sending a message that you're not worth me trying to say your name or remember your name. So I'll call you Bobby because it's easier for me, you know? And when parents are not aware, there's nothing they can do about it. So it's always necessary to understand what the child is experiencing in the school as well, you know. And I'm so glad you mentioned color blindness, because that's another one that I also had to address recently when I read a post by an agency, you know, to their employees about, you know, we're with you because of what's happening. We support you. We support Black Lives Matter. But they added a line in there, you know, we don't see color. We see you for who you are. So I had to say, you know, it's defeating the purpose, you know. You cannot say we don't see color, because you're basically saying, again, you don't matter, you know.
Okay.
So these are the things where we have to speak up when we can, when we feel empowered to do so. Um, you know, and children also, if they're, you know, learning these things at home, if someone calls you a name that's not yours, you know, make sure you correct them, you know, so that they're not afraid to speak up for themselves as well. But it can be very difficult, you know, it can be very difficult. So I think we have to be in tune with what's happening, not just in the home, at school, with friends, you know, so we can, you know, do better at empowering our children.
So basically, what you're saying is that we've got to go back to old school, where parents were at the school. You did not have to beg a parent to come up and meet the teacher before they were invited. The parent was going to meet the teacher, and you would find out if that teacher was calling your child by a wrong name. You've got to know who the children's friends are, and all those kinds of things. And you are so right about little something that seems insignificant, like calling me by another name. My daughter's name is Veronique.
Mhm.
It's not Veronica.
Mhm.
I was very clear on the name I wanted to give her.
Mhm.
And I remember when she was maybe in like first grade or something like that, she came home crying because the teacher kept calling her Veronica.
Right.
Well, not only did I have the conversation with the teacher, you know, I sent a note as well, letting her know that I wanted to speak with her, but also mentioning that situation. And I wrote it out in syllables so that she would know how to say it. Long O, you know, all of that. And then I taught my first grader to be able to say, I'm sorry, that's not my name.
Right. Right.
My name is Veronique.
Yes.
And so she she had no problem
Yes.
after that,
Yes.
making sure people knew what her name was. So
Yeah.
wow, this has been awesome.
Yeah.
We're going to kind of wrap it up, but I want to give you more time to share anything that I might not have brought up, if you would, or anything else you might like to.
So yes, I mean, because we were just talking about parents being more involved with the children's schools and so on, we also have to acknowledge that, again, for a lot of minority populations, they are overworked and have few support systems. And so they're the ones who have been impacted by COVID. They're out working, cleaning the hospitals, you know, driving the buses, you know, and they just have a lot on their plates, you know, and so it has to be a societal institutional change to
Yes.
so that we can see long lasting effects of, you know, parents, you know, are so that they can support their children in the proper way. We can't say, you know, we want you to be a great parent, an excellent parent, but you're overwhelmed, you're overstressed, you know, and it just, we're not providing them with the adequate and necessary resources for them to do that, you know. And so I have also seen, you know, some parents who um, don't put themselves first in terms of their mental health. And, you know, when now we're doing everything on Zoom. So if I'm starting a session and the mom is setting up the session for the child, you know, you can hear the parents' labored breathing. They're just so exhausted with trying to manage everything. And, you know, children might not hear you yelling, but they can hear you breathing. And so them seeing that is sending a message to them that, you know, mom is overwhelmed. I can't talk to her about this because she already has enough that she's dealing with. So oftentimes children will do things to protect their parents because they don't want to add, you know, to the load that a lot of minority parents are already experiencing. So my only hope is that, given what we're currently experiencing, with what we're learning about COVID, how it's drastically impacting minority populations, you know, with the protests and the riots, that the change does start from within the systems, you know. And so, you know, wherever we work, noticing what's happening in the places that we work and trying to find a way to have those issues addressed, because otherwise we will always be internalizing racism. You know, we feel like we just have to suppress everything and not deal with it, you know, but it's not the way to be, which is why things have exploded to the level that they have. You know, there are lots of unemployed families, parents can't find jobs. You know, most of minorities cannot work from home, so they don't have that luxury of being able to do that. You know, so we have so many expectations, but yet we're not providing the adequate support that they need to take care of their children adequately. And so I think for me, that is one of my biggest concerns as I watch, you know, parents struggling, single mothers trying to figure out, you know, how can I take care of my children, also take care of myself and maintain, you know, good physical and mental health as well.
Amen. Amen. Definitely. And even though we have not been able to get around and do some of the things that maybe we would normally do to help boost up our, you know, mental health. I know for some parents, just something as simple as getting your hair done. These are things we weren't able to do, so we had to certainly be creative. And that could just be simply just, I need 5 minutes. You know, and you feel I like how you said that they might not hear you yelling, but they hear your breathing. Yeah. Okay. Amen. That is definitely something. Well, we certainly have been lifting up our parents at Grace United Church of Christ. We have a prayer line on Sunday mornings, and essential workers and parents and all those who never had a chance to just stop. It has been important that we continue to keep them covered, but we have a unique opportunity now. We have got to stop being so into ourselves. And as you mentioned, the people that are on the front lines, the essential workers, we have got to fight for them and with them. To make sure that there are better circumstances, because we tend to, like you say, think the parent maybe, or as you implied, that the parent is not the best parent because they can't always come up to the school when you want them to come, because their job will fire them if they do, you know. But we do have this opportunity now to be a part of reshaping this world going forth. And I do pray that we will take advantage of that opportunity, because there's so much to do. And if everybody took a little part, we could certainly participate in dismantling this stuff, you know, that's going on that disproportionately affects Black and Brown people. Thank you so very much, Dr. Dorcas, for blessing us this morning. I do want to see if there is a question. I do see a participant or two. So if we could unmute, we'll see if they have a question. I don't see anything in the chat as of yet. So I see Deacon Cheryl Bray. Do you have a question?
You know what, I just want to say thank you. Thank you both for this conversation. Thank you, Doctor, for being with us and providing us with the opportunity to hear from you, and then Reverend Mel. She's so insightful, and a principal, and a pastor, and a mother at church. But I've heard, even my own grandson, I've heard children voice their concerns. So I just want to thank you for creating this platform on today to educate us adults, that we may open our ears and our eyes. And even with this change that we're all facing, you said it, parents have to change too. We cannot raise our children based on the when I was growing up. Now, there's some valid circumstances when we were growing up and things that we have said, but our babies are hurting and they are inquisitive. They hear all about COVID and the racism. So I mean, my heart's full. It's been full for several months, but this is really, it's just so helpful. And Reverend Mel, you opened something that we should all think about, where there are many things that we should think about, but how do we engage ourselves to make a difference overall with the racism? How do we, make a difference with the grieving mothers? As a friend and I have said, the wailing mothers who have all of this responsibility. So I just want to thank you. I'm glad that I drove like I don't know what to get to my laptop, so I would not miss this. So thank you very much, and God bless you both.
God bless you too. You kind of had a question on the end of that, so I was just going to ask Dr. Dorcas, does she have any ideas of ways to, I think you said something about helping dismantle this or something to that effect?
So my suggestion, I think we tend to do things that we're passionate about, that we feel called to do. And so because there are so many different options right now, it's good to look into either an organization or a support group that you feel you can add to, that you can contribute to, because not everyone is able to go out and protest, but maybe we can support other mothers or fathers who've lost their children to violence or COVID, and so knowing where you feel your passion is, what you feel your calling is. Do I want to work with children more? So can I find an organization that's doing work with children specifically, and maybe, dedicate to volunteering there as well? So I think there are just so many different ways we can be involved that do not require us being out there protesting, if that's something we're not able to do, but we can do from our homes as well.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen. And we have Dr. Ollie Knight, who is a clinical social worker. So I don't know if she has a question she'd like to add or ask, rather. Okay. So once again, Dr. Dorcas, you have truly lived up to your name. I just want to ask you, did your mom name you after the Dorcas in the Bible?
She actually named me after the nurse who helped give birth to me. So,
wow.
Yeah, and so it's such a meaningful story, because I was born with problems. I wasn't breathing. The nurse her name was Dorcas, and so my mom decided to name me after her.
Oh,
And
right.
it's just, I am so glad and honored that I do have that name, because I think it just has guided my path up until this point. So.
Amen. Amen.
Reverend Mel, I had my phone on mute.
Okay.
I muted it. I don't have a question, but I do have a comment that this was very insightful, very insightful. And I am just so glad that you had the vision to bring this to us, because with you having grandchildren and all that, it's very important to have this information. So thank you, Dr. Matawe, and thank you, Reverend Melody.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, God bless all of you all. And it has certainly been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for allowing us this opportunity to be with you. And if you would like to further discuss this with Dr. Dorcas Matoe, please reach out to us via our website at www.grucc.org. Or you can reach out to me personally at Rev Seaton, SEATON at grucc.org. God bless you and God keep you. Thank you.
Thank you.